Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome to another happy hour. Thanks for joining. I've been hanging out in the chat with you guys, seeing folks from all around the world here. Steven from Tampa, Florida. Got from Syracuse, Honolulu. Chris, I'm jealous. St. Louis. I visited St. Louis once in my life. Canada, more Canada, Dubai. I mean, pretty wild that we got people from so far and and such a variety of locations. So, welcome. My name is Jeff. Some of you may know me better as the Revit Kid. I run a blog called therevitKid.com and a website, a training series of tutorials called BIM After Dark. So, I want to thank you for joining me. Today's topic is kind of cool. What I did is I had in a couple mediums I asked, so on Twitter I asked some questions about what the topic should be. And within my membership group, which is BIM After Dark, if you're interested, definitely check it out. BIMAfterDarkBeta.com, I believe is it. I'll post it in the links. But anyways, asking basically 4 topics, and it doesn't mean that maybe in the future we'll just do some of the other ones. But I was trying to figure out which one I wanted to talk about today. No special guests, just me. So hopefully you enjoy seeing my face. And so the topics were Photoshop / post-processing, which I know some of you guys were pretty interested in last week after I did the Twin Motion tutorial. So if you didn't see last week's happy hour, definitely check it out either on my channel or on the blog. But I ran through Twin Motion and I talked about maybe post-processing those. So maybe we'll do that another time. But overwhelmingly, everyone was interested in hearing about BIM in construction. So whether that's Revit or maybe a couple adjacent software, I should say. So that's actually what we're going to talk about today. Before we move on, if you're here and you aren't subscribed to my YouTube channel, please subscribe. I have only a few hundred more to hit 30,000, which would be really, really cool. So definitely subscribe. I actually have this cool graphic. Let's see. Getting a little better at some of these live stream things, which is kind of cool. So make sure you subscribe and hit notifications so you know when the next live stream is going to be. But also it'd be really cool to take over 30,000, which would be awesome. We got somebody from Robert. How's it going, Robert? Nice to hear from you, bud. From north of Boston, New Zealand, Austin, Texas. Wow, pretty wild to see the variety of locations and people that join these things and that follow the blog, which is awesome. Hopefully, if it is time, depending on where you are, I know some of you it may be the morning, some of you may be night. I don't know. Maybe it's still in the middle of the day. Feel free to grab a cocktail and cheers. I hope everyone's safe and healthy through these crazy times. I'm just finishing week 8, I think, of basically being locked at home, doing all this stuff, and I think we all deserve it. So I'm actually drinking a Ruby port wine. So anyone who's interested in port wines, I have quite a collection of them, and I've tried many over the years. So feel free to reach out. Red, white, doesn't really matter. But yeah. So today we're gonna do. I guess my thought was I was trying to figure out how to approach the topic of BIM and construction. So I have a lot of different material that I've presented in the past, as well as internally, externally within the company I work for or with, and sort of on the blog. And I mean, I've talked about this topic quite a bit in different settings. And so what I decided to do is I'd like it to be a Q&A to some extent. So I want you guys to ask questions. And I think what I've set up here is just a quick series of images and discussions to sort of roll through the topic of how BIM or Revit is utilized throughout the process of a construction management company. So, it may be a little different if you're a contractor or a general contractor, a plumber, electrician, but there's still obviously a lot of adjacencies there. And so by doing that, I think it'll probably spur questions in your mind. So in the beginning here, I'm probably just going to run through for 5-10 minutes a quick spiel of how we utilize models and the general idea of BIM throughout the construction process, starting with pre-construction, which for those designers out there and architects out there, pre-construction is basically during the design phase. In most jobs, it's when depending on how the contracts are set up, it's usually working with the design team early on to set up the plan. Even if it's after the fact, there's still a pre-construction piece of setting things up. So what I want to do is sort of take the first 5 to 10 minutes here and run through a bunch of examples and sort of walk you through the process of how we utilize models throughout the construction process. Part of the reason why I run through this topic often is a lot of what I do on a daily basis is actually interacting with architects and design teams as the construction manager, and one of the things I realized on the first day I started working for a construction management firm, coming in as an architect, is that a lot of the reservations with sharing models, sharing information, and the sort of kumbaya collaboration between the architect and the construction manager has a lot more to do with the fear of the unknown. And so what I like to do with these presentations and these topics and these discussions is really sort of bring down those walls and just show the design teams, for example, that it's not all that scary when you start sharing things, including your models. And then also on the construction side, I think if those of you out there are contractors or construction managers, I think it'd be kind of cool to see sort of some of the things that we're doing within Turner Construction and my group itself, using models and different technologies and stuff like that. So I see we already have some questions coming in, which is great. So what I'm going to do is during this first piece, feel free to ask questions. If I see something that sort of triggers more of a discussion, I may bring it up then. If not, I may finish the content and then go back. But I have a bunch of examples ready to roll. I'm ready to answer any questions you have. But for right now, I think what I want to do is just sort of start with, hey, Philip Chan's here. What's up, Phil? Long time no see, man. So let me flip over and we're going to start with a little presentation. So for those of you unfamiliar with the term on the screen here, VDC. So in the construction side of things, and so it's bleeding into architecture a little bit, but or the design side, but there was a sort of coming to Jesus moment, so to speak, that we had to figure out how to term what it is that our group of folks do. And this is not just within Turner Construction, this is the broader construction management term of teams and companies. And so there was a lot of random things from BIM manager to coordinator to whatever. And so VDC has kind of become the term that we're using within our company as well as within most of the industry. And so for those of you not familiar with it, it stands for Virtual Design and Construction. And so most of the time when you hear VDC, it's typically going to be folks like myself who are utilizing BIM and models to a greater extent. And so just know that there is sort of a synonymous connection between VDC and BIM, but the reality is, there's so much more that comes with it beyond just the model itself. So anyway, so VDC in action. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to quickly run through what is a coming to Jesus moment? It's an aha moment, a light bulb, a ding, an idea in your head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through pre-construction, construction, and operation, just sort of talking about little pieces of where the VDC team within a construction management group, so in general construction management groups, what we will do within those phases. So bear with me, as I've actually never done a little slide deck like this before, so this would be kind of cool. Oh, sweet. Okay, so the very first thing that our team will do is we'll meet and start the collaboration immediately with the design team. It is so important on any of these jobs that there is a communication and a dialogue between the design team and the construction management company, especially on projects where we get to come on early. So if you're working on jobs where the general contractor or the CM is coming on a little later, it's a little harder, but there's still a huge dialogue that needs to happen right away. And so what this is really just kind of similar to the discussion I'm having now. It's a let's open the books and let's say, hey, Mr. Architect, this is what we plan on. This is what we'd like to use your models for downstream. These are the type of things that we do. These are the value that they add to the project. These are the value that they add to you. Quickly, Carol, you just asked what does VDC stand for. Sorry, it stands for Virtual Design and Construction. So, so again, so the very first thing that that the VDC team or manager, whoever it is, should be doing, if you're the design team out there, is meeting with you and discussing how these models are going to be used. None of this works without communication and upfront information. Okay, so understanding how your models are set up, understanding how we'd like to use them, and then figuring out where we can combine and collaborate to get the most value out of it. Okay, so that's the very first thing that we do. Then, again, in construction management, you think about pre-construction and services that a company like Eterna Construction would do. It's quantity takeoff, right? And so one of the things that we've doing, and I mentioned this a couple times in the blog, I even gave a spoke at an entire session on this at Built last year in Seattle, is we are doing model-based quantity takeoff. And so this is a program called Assemble, which at the time of taking the screenshot that you're seeing here was not owned by Autodesk, but now there's a little Autodesk logo on top there. And so now Autodesk did pick up this program. But what you see on the screen that I just did there is a quick lighting takeoff. And if you've ever tried to do quantity takeoff using models, you know that there are the data itself, for the most part, is going to be what it is, right? A square foot is a square foot. But there are softwares that make it a lot easier. So in Revit, yes, you could create a schedule and you could export the schedule and you go. You could use Navisworks Quantity Workbook. If anyone's ever used that, you know that it's not a lot of fun. But you could do that too, and that takes out the data. But my whole thing when it came to quantity takeoff is I didn't want my team, which is the VDC team, which is probably folks more like you guys out there who are technology gurus who are really good at the software and can dig into software. I didn't want us to be the ones who were doing takeoffs and handing data over to our estimating team. So I didn't want an estimator to come over and say, hey, I need to know how many cubic yards of concrete are in this footing or something like that. And then we just spit out a spreadsheet. We hand it to them and say, here you go. What I really wanted was I wanted the estimating team to be able to extract that data on their own, but also have that visual connection with the model. And so, because really the data is useless unless you have that visual connection with the model, right? So our estimating team is, thanks to Assemble, because Assemble is extremely simple to use. It's lightweight. It's a web-based program. And so if you have not heard about it, check it out. And also search on the blog. Maybe I'll post some links to it as well of some of the information I've given on it. I've given some workshops and webinars. But if you are someone or a company that does a lot of quantity takeoff, this is a program you should definitely look into. Again, the big thing with me was being able to give our estimating team the ability to extract this data and connect to that model element while they're doing it. So when something seems wrong, if they did a check and they're saying there should be 30 tons of ductwork or steel or something like that, and they're getting 10, the ability to look at the model, you can say, oh, look at that. All this ductwork was named the wrong thing, or it's coming in as a generic model or something like that. And so what we've done on the VDC side of things in our department is most of what we do is just uploading models, because it's not reasonable to have all the estimators have a Revit license. And we also vet them out to see how the models look, and then we just do a little bit of training. And so that's part of what the quantity takeoff is. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions in the chat about quantity takeoff. And the first one that actually came in, I was trying to decide if I should run through everything and then to go through the questions, but maybe I'll just go through questions as we're talking about it. Model-based quantity takeoff, I know, is one of the scariest things usually when discussing with architects. I think, and again, it has a lot to do with the unknown and not being comfortable with how your models are made. And so a question actually Vanessa just asked was, how do you decide whether a model is usable or not? And it's easy. Every model is usable. So the honest truth is, if you understand how the program works, how Revit works, how it's built, and what data you can and can't use from it, no matter what, even a schematic design model is usable to some extent, right? All of you hopefully have seen or can imagine what it's like to do a two-dimensional takeoff, right? Whether you're doing it on a PDF or whether you're doing it on a piece of paper with a scale, you're scaling, a scaled image or drawing of your floor plan. If I was to call anyone out there who's an architect right now, anyone that's in the chat right now, and I said, hey, if I wanted to know how many toilets are in your building, not as a contractor, not as anything, but if I'm the architect and my boss comes in and says, hey, how many toilets do we have in the building? And you're using Revit, what would you do? I guarantee you what you would do is two things. Either you'd have a toilet schedule already ready to go, or you'd go into your floor plan or something like that. You'd right click and you'd say select all instances in model or something like that. And you say, oh, there's 453 toilets, right? That is exactly how you would get the information. So why would you want the contractor who's sort of been charged with budgeting and setting up the estimate of your job and then buying your job, sit there with a mouse or a highlighter and manually click, 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 and count how many toilets are in your project, right? So that's the mindset that you have to think about. And so what we do as far as the question of how you know if a model is usable is, we do have a group of people who are very familiar with Revit and the modeling process and the program itself. And so we do look at the models and we take a stab at, some of the quirks of it. But the reality is the big piece is that visual connection, right? If you're looking at my screen right now, or what I'm seeing, I guess, there's an inventory that shows you quantities, and on the right there's a 3D view of it. And so you can really quickly understand that by selecting stuff and seeing where it highlights, you can see why generic wall 6-inch isn't giving you the right quantity, because there's only 2 of those and the rest of them are called generic wall 8-inch, right? And so that's the key. The key is not it's not whether a model is good or usable. It's understanding what data is usable from the model. Every single model, even the crummiest models on the planet, have usable data from them. Okay, so make a schedule. So Eric answered my question. Yes, you'd make a schedule, right? If you were counting toilets, or you, like I said, you could also right click select if they're all the same instance, obviously, but exactly, you would use the model to count those things, right? If I asked you how many square footage of roof you have, you'd probably select your roofs and look at the total area or make a schedule in Revit. And that's all that's happening with model-based quantity takeoff. Have you guys used Destiny Estimator? We have not used Destiny Estimator. Right now, the 2 sort of softwares that are floating around the company are Assemble and Costex. And so there's a little bit of a debate on which one is going to be the future as far as what we do, but my personal opinion right now is that when it comes to model-based quantity takeoff, Assemble just has it right. Okay, so that's model-based quantity takeoff. Before I jump over to here, I think there's a little comment here. Because that count makes the architect liable for over. So Chris said, because the count makes the architect liable for the over or under, the CM must count. So yes and no. I don't. The last thing I want to talk about right now is contract and legal discrepancies. Because the second you talk about contracts, progress goes out the window. Okay. But the reality is, if what you're doing is you're trying to hold the contractor liable, fine, whatever. But you also want to have accurate pricing on your project. And so do you want to have a low number during bidding because someone missed 30 toilets and then have a change order for those 30 toilets and then deal with that in the end? Or do you want to have the right number up front? That's my whole thing. Regardless, toss the contract out the window right now. Please, I mean, I know there's going to be a lot of people talking about them, but please, let's try and think about this without this damn contracts. LOD is important when deciding usable, yes, to some extent, but not really either, because if you, at a schematic design level, you still have walls maybe, and maybe doors, and maybe windows, and maybe they're all named the same wall. Maybe you use only a generic 12-inch wall. In that program, Assemble, the estimator can hold control and just manually click 4 or 5 walls and then get an area, as opposed to taking the elevation and drawing up a polygon and then getting an area from that, a scaled drawing, right? It's the same damn thing, right? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to catch up with some of these. So, too many architects have spare windows. Too many architects have spare windows in their garage from this. That's a good point. Yes. So, I mean, that's my whole thing. And again, remember, I'm coming at this from the idea of 10 years as an architect before 5 years as a contractor. So I've seen both sides of it. And my personal opinion is that I'd much rather have an accurate estimate than have a low number because contractors miss something due to either bad modeling or bad drawing practices. Call me progressive if you want, whatever. All right, so moving on from quantity model-based quantity takeoff, a lot of what we do in the VDC department is we do a lot of visualization, and it's surprising. People are always very surprised with how much of the rendering, visualization, and communication diagramming part of being an architect came into play in VDC, and that's why it's funny. You've probably seen a lot of my content lately, where I'm talking about Twinmotion and Lumion and Enscape, and you're thinking, how is he using this as a contractor or working with a contractor? And the reality is, especially a construction manager, but really any contractor, even general contractors and so on, a lot of it is developing a plan, right? But then it's also making sure that people understand your plan, people buy into your plan, and then people execute your plan, right? So if you're reliable for getting the right cost, for getting the building on schedule, and then getting the building built by that cost, then a lot of it has to do with people understanding that plan. And so what we do all the time is we take information from our superintendents, our project managers, our project executives. We're taking that information, which to them is either built up in their brains. I could tell you, without offending anyone, hopefully, that contractors aren't usually the best at visualizing their information from their brain. And then visualizing it. So things like logistics plans, you can see an example right here of an overall logistics plan of a project, diagrams, operations plans. I have some more examples that I'll roll through here, but all this is using things like Revit to do exploded axons and stuff like that. Enscape to do VR. What you're seeing here is a Lumion image to show different phases of a project, to show sequences as they get built. Another important part of construction in general is safety, now more than ever, right? I mean, we've gone from worrying about, anti-cut gloves and different face masks, and now worrying about social distancing and how many people are on a project and where they're located and what, temperature monitoring when they come on the job site, right? So safety is huge, and being able to, again, communicate the safety plans to our team is extremely important in the early stages. And I do see that there's some conversation going on. I'll get to that in a second. It all looks really interesting, but I don't want to have too much of me sitting here and digging in and reading. But I do want to quickly read through it, and looks like it's super interesting. As I expected, talking about model-based quantity takeoff and who's liable is causing a whole bunch of discussion always. So then again, talking about the idea of communication, and now we're rolling into construction, right? So now we're talking about creating bidding documents and creating information for bidders. So your subcontractors, typically your concrete, your mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, glazing, exterior wall, you name it, right? And so taking this information, this plan, and all this information that we know from sitting on this job and working on it for 2 years before it even goes to bid, creating documents that explain it. An example on screen right now is a story from a project. This is up in Boston, and it's a hospital where we're attaching to an existing hospital, and we're doing some crazy piecemeal demo work. And so created a bunch of documents here where we're peeling apart pieces of the building using the construction documents and showing the subs, these are areas where you're going to be demoing the building, how you plan on doing it, or this is what we're going to expect you to do. And so this information becomes extremely important in the bidding process, as you can imagine, similar to the takeoff process. Understanding and having accurate bids on a job is very important, because no one, no matter what people think or say down the road, no one really wants change orders on a job, and no one really wants RFIs. I know that there's a negative connotation to them as far as who's making money off of changes, but the reality is nobody wants them. I could tell you right now. And so trying to get that information out there to the project teams, to the bidders while they're bidding the job is extremely important. So we make extremely complex, very large bidder information packages. Now we're on to construction. Okay, and so actually before I jump into this, let me back up. I think I'll probably, because that's a whole nother piece. So let's do, we're kind of ending the pre-construction piece here, and we're bidding. So let me just quickly run through some of these comments to see if there's any questions that I can talk about. Here's most bosses would have it. BIM and SD, yes. BIM and DD, yes. BIM and CD, are you kidding me? That's pretty funny there. I'm trying to see if there's any question here. So Michael mentioned that not all the consultants and contractors detail in Revit or model every item, which would give you a detailed quantity. Unfortunately, yes, we're doing model-based takeoff, but and this I guess I'll bring back to the contract discussion. Use the construction, the documents themselves, the 2D documents are still the delivery method, right? And so there's not a single job yet where we can only do a full 2D, 3D takeoff, because there's always information that exists in 2 dimensions that doesn't exist in 3 dimensions. It's the nature of the business so far. I hope one day that's not the case, but for now it is more of a hybrid where you have to have the documents because that is what we own. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about the contract piece of that. Just a little discussion between a couple of folks there about that, which is kind of cool. Talking about line works and 2D and keeping an eye out for that. And yes, like I said, unfortunately there's still a lot of 2-dimensional documentation going on, right? And so that has to be taken into account. And so it is taken into account. And that's, there's no estimator that I've worked with that will just extract the information from the model and not double check the documents or look at the documents. It's just the way it is, right? Steve asked, where can constructability review come into play with the VDC? That's a great question. So I didn't mention it on this timeline, but the reality is during that pre-construction process is where we will do constructability reviews. And I didn't have any examples there, but let me see if I can quickly pull one up because that's a really good point. A huge bonus to having contractors on earlier is to do these constructability reviews. It's to look at the documents, whether it's DD, whether it's early CDs, and basically ask what those RFIs are really going to be in the future, right? Whether it's the bidder RFIs or whether it's us. Usually the constructability review items are going to become RFIs down the road. So let me, I don't know if I had any of these open. I think I might be able to get to one really quick, some examples. So that would happen in pre-construction. So that's a really good question and a really good point. I think I have one. Oh, here we go. These are some good ones. So I'm just going to download them from my Teams there. And then open them. You can't see what's happening. I apologize. I'm just clicking around on the other monitor as you stare at my demo visuals. So what we do on the VDC side of things is usually our team, our construction or pre-construction team, for example, they're obviously still doing constructability reviews on documents, right? Again, it's all back to the contract and that crap where the documents own. But when they have a question that they're unsure about, they'll come to us who may be more familiar with the model and be able to jump into it, and they'll start investigating some of those things. So actually, if I pull this over here, you can see here's an example of some items that we put together. So all these items are related to constructability review items. Bluebeam. How many people out there like the new Bluebeam? Not sure yet. So you can see these are just sort of images that we made, whether we're just using Revit snapshots, or we're using Enscape, for example, to take some of these snapshots, just because of course I need to make things look beautiful, so all my team needs to do the same thing. And so what these are just taking the model information, looking at the 2-dimensional information that maybe our team has questions on, and then just making little snippets and vignettes of that. So like here's a great example of a beam versus a demo beam versus a different beam, et cetera, right? And then here's another one, just a couple little items asking about some different, whether it's suggesting options or doing exploded axons or something to explain our sequence. And these are constructability things, again, that's all ideally happening earlier on in this pre-construction phase. Wow, look at all this stuff, pretty sweet. Have you had any experience with Procore? Yes, at Turner Construction, we use Procore on all of our jobs for document management. The only jobs that aren't using Procore right now are usually the ones where either owners require a very specific software or ones that were before Procore. So in my region of Turner Construction, I should say, we're all using Procore for every single job. As someone, again, on the architecture side of things, who lived the dream of being a CA so a construction administrator, through 3 different projects, with working with 3 different construction managers who all used the old school email system of document management. So every submittal, every RFI was emailed back and forth with 2 different logs on Excel, and Procore was something I really wish I had when I was doing that. So if for those of you architects out there who are dealing with that, you should probably suggest it or look into it for the teams there. Let's see. Just think that's what people theory watching. Derek said Bluebeam is hot trash. Thank you, Derek. I agree. I wouldn't say it's hot trash. The new one they tried to add all this crazy graphical stuff, and it just does weird stuff. All right, how do you create all those graphics? Randy just asked that. Great question. A lot of different methods. I have courses on that. If you check out my site, I have videos on some of it, and a lot of my methods that I use, you're seeing them here in different ways. Some of them are just simple Revit exports. Some of them are using Lumion. Some of them are using Enscape. Some of them are using Twinmotion. Some of them are using all the above mixed with Photoshop or Premiere, and making videos and images. So there's a lot that goes on there. It's very much the same way and process that you may use to develop 3D renderings as an architect. So that's where that relationship really comes into play, which is sweet. All right. So I think that sort of wraps up a little bit of the pre-construction. So if I missed a couple comments, I apologize. I'll always look back on them, or you can just ask again if you think it's really, really important. All right, so let me jump into a little bit of construction stuff now. So one of the things that's taken off right now is production tracking, so model-based production tracking. And this is huge in the sense that we can now take model data and we can track in real time our progress and use the quantities from model data. So no longer are we highlighting plans on a wall and saying, here, this steel is done. We're clicking the pieces of steel or tapping them on an iPad out in the fields and saying they were installed on this date. And so it may not seem all that sexy or attractive, especially to maybe architects out there, but the back end of this to me is the real future of model-based tracking and production tracking in the field, is the amount of data that you can pull from that. So it may seem like, hey, all we know now is that 13 pieces of steel were installed on January 1st, right? That's what it seems like up front. But on the back end, when you think about it, we can say, well, we know how many pieces were installed that day. We know how much they weighed, so we know the length, the tonnage, because it's in the model. We know what size pieces they were, so we know that they were 2 W8x10s, 3 W12x's, and whatever, right? And then we know we can start averaging them throughout it. And so when you look at that data and you start thinking on the big data side of things, you can actually start using this to forecast. And you can say, well, you're averaging X amount of pieces a day, you're averaging X amount of tons per day, and you can adjust your plan based on that information. So if you know you only have 30 days left and you're averaging 10 pieces a day, and you have whatever 500 pieces, I'm not doing the math right now, and your data is telling you that you actually need to be putting in place 35 pieces a day to meet your date, you can actually in real time adjust your schedule to try and meet those demands. And then even further along, you can take that data and actually maybe optimize schedules or designs. So imagine if you're a project executive or a superintendent who's in charge of setting up a schedule. You can now take that data and you can say, instead of just my 40 years of history and knowledge knowing that it's average of 42 pieces, you can look at the exact similar building and look at how many you actually did. But you can also look at designs and say, maybe if I changed all these W8 buys to W10 buys, which obviously seem bigger, but maybe it's a less weight, it's a W10 by 30 instead of a W8 by 70, maybe I increase my efficiency, and you can start even optimizing design, working with design teams during pre-con. So I'm super excited about this. It's taken off like wildfire, and I thought this had I guess not the Power BI dashboard. So a Power BI is also a big thing of what we're doing, and I haven't spoken much about it on the blog or on this channel, and I think maybe I will in the future. Yeah, I think I probably will. But the making dashboards out of Power BI to show production has been pretty huge. So So before I move on to that, that was a lot of information. I think I saw a couple comments come in. People are still talking about Procore, which is great. It is great. I definitely think you guys should check it out. Ruben just has a quick question talking about the estimating thing, and maybe I'll just answer that because why not? Would you use a linear base family for this? Conduit runs. We have just been detailing the runs to actual modeled manholes. I'm not sure what you mean. If you're modeling it, whether it's a linear base family or whether it's conduit, if you're using a conduit family or conduit system family or even a pipe and calling it conduit, I'm not really sure what you're asking there, but essentially, instead, whatever you can do to model instead of drawing lines is better for quantity takeoff, right? I mean, that's cool. Okay, I'm not going to talk about this too much, but every single job that we work on, their 3D coordination is happening. We're lucky enough in my state of Connecticut and generally the region too of New England that we have some really, really, really good subcontractors out there who are really progressive and help make this process of coordinating a model extremely easy for the most part. There's always a few weak links, but but basically, for those of you not familiar with the 3D coordination process, it's basically taking mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, and any other very specific contractors or trade partners, and coordinating their 3D models. So they're modeling their stuff in 3D of how they're going to build it before we build it. And so what you're seeing here is just an example of a coordination model where you have fire protection, plumbing, HVAC, all that good stuff, all in the model, and reworking and configuring duct runs and pipe runs to make sure that in the ideal situation, no one is clashing with each other. And a lot of the trade partners have taken it to the next level where they are using a lot of the stuff for their shop drawings, for their fabrication, and it really does eliminate the rework in the field. I mean, anyone who's dealt with a project before or not with 3D coordination and with 3D coordination can immediately know the difference between those two. In an ideal situation, if you guys are MEP engineers out there, a lot of this stuff should work pretty easily right off the bat. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. What would be one tool you wish Autodesk would add to make the VDC easier? That's a good question, Scour. So Scour DX asked, what would be one tool you wish Autodesk would add to make the VDC easier? First of all, why does it have to be Autodesk? But I won't go there. And I'm not really sure. I think the big issue is less about what tools exist, but more about the interoperability between the tools and how they talk to each other. And this is not just Autodesk. And so, in general, when you think about it, when you're on the design side of things, you're typically working with a site and civil engineer or landscape architect, a MEP or MEP consultant or engineer, a structural engineer, and an architect are kind of the main, right? You have the acousticians and servery or kitchen and stuff like that. And so in that format, it's a lot easier to set up a system where you can make all the programs talk to each other. And hopefully in that system, you're all using Revit anyways, right? When you go beyond the construction or into the construction phase of things and you have 35 subcontractors who may have even third tier contractors within them, and you're talking about steel fabricators, miscellaneous steel fabricators, curtain wall fabricators, exterior wall fabricators, maybe you have precast panels, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, fire protection, pneumatic tubes if you're in a hospital, and then maybe you start prefabbing stuff. So you're talking about like 35, 40 people and companies that are all using their software that makes their process easier. And so to me, it's less about what tool would be, what tool can you make to make all of this easier. It's more about how can we figure out a way to make all of everyone else's tools talk to each other. In a perfect world, if everyone used one tool, it'd be great. If the whole world used Revit, for example, I know that's not reasonable because I know Revit, and there's some things it just can't do well, I should say. yeah, it'd be great. But that to me is the biggest thing, and I'm sure there's people out there who agree that that's the, having all these things, all these people, everyone be able to do their job while still being able to interoperate and sort of collaborate with each other. That's the key. And so sweet. So that was 3D coordination. I guess some people agree with interoperability, which is sweet. David M asked, what's the ratio of subs, so subcontractors or trade partners, that actually model their own work in Connecticut? So majority of them in the MEP FP area of what we do have the ability to model and model their own work. And usually what's great about it, and this is what I meant by we have subcontractors that are good in that sense, they're doing it because it helps their process. So they're not just doing it because we're telling them to. They're doing it because it makes their job easier, and they may be fabricating from it. So that's what I like to see the most about it is, it's not doing it because we're doing it because the CM's making us and they're hiring us and blah 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 blah. It's really because on their end of things, it's going to make their lives easier. So it's pretty high percentage in the Connecticut. Going beyond MEP FP. Into exterior wall and concrete and precast and stuff, then you start getting a much lesser percentage. But it's really nice to see that even those areas, drywall, for example, they're starting to look into it and trying to see how they can utilize these things for their processes, which is pretty awesome. Brad White is just complaining about version control on Revit. Sorry, man. It is what it is. Revit's never been backwards compatible forever and ever. Some things you just got to deal with it. Okay, so now we're in construction still, and one of the things that we do a lot of as well, and this sort of feeds into a lot of what you guys have seen on my channel or even on my blog, is the idea of virtual reality and virtual mockups and virtual inspection, which is pretty sweet. And so the reason I like to show this is I think it's hard. Most people don't think of virtual reality as being a part of the process and sort of a way of doing business. They think of it more as a gimmick. And so what I wanted to do, and my goal and what we've achieved is, it is literally a almost a basic service or a base service now for our jobs to do these type of things, because we've found so much value in them and we've made them a real part of it. And so the two ways that we do that are using virtual reality for what we call virtual mockups, and then virtual inspections, which is really cool. So let me pull up, actually, I think, yeah, here we go. So virtual mockups is one that is probably your most the easiest to conceive and think of in your mind, is taking a room, so for example a hospital space, and mocking it up, and then having end users, so nurses, administrative staff, etc., walk through the space and give you feedback on it. And so this could be things like in place of a paper mock-up on the wall, we could do this, and that's what we've done, and we start refining things like locations of outlets, locations of random pieces of furniture, if there's casework, especially, looking at that kind of stuff, and then refining it, and then we go and build our physical mock-up. Maybe it ends up being the whole room, and then we look at the quality and workmanship. But that's sort of the right away when people think of virtual reality, that's probably where they go. And that's something that architects can immediately think of too, because the reality is, on the design side of things, the fact that we have this technology, I don't see why every architect wouldn't want to use this with clients to refine the design and not deal with changes down the road. Because owner changes, let's be honest, are probably one of the biggest problems in our industry, right? Late owner changes. So just a couple examples of what we did. Those are labor and delivery rooms. This one is the same labor and delivery room. This is a one of the head surgeons, actually. He's just chilling in his VR goggles, which is pretty fun. So then those examples were sort of healthcare, school, that kind of stuff, where we're refining the actual design, working with the architect, building in information that we have and data that we might have, like coordinated information, equipment cuts and submittals and stuff like that. Trying to get the most final sort of aspect of it. Before I jump into the inspections, I just wanted to check. I saw a couple comments come in, and Jeff is great. Oh, thanks, dude. I really want to get a virtual mockup like this. So there's a couple questions about Steve. What's up, Steve? Steve said Zero looks happy. Yes, he does. The program that I was using in those examples that you guys saw, that was Enscape, and that was just sitting on top of Revit. So everything you saw there was a Revit model. If I go backwards, will it play? It's fine there. So everything you saw there was a Revit model, just running an Enscape using HTC Vive. We're trying different things here. I do have multiple posts, and I will post them in any of the links I mentioned. I'll post in the replay, which will be on the blog tomorrow. So I do have some posts on the process we used to set up those from a couple years ago, as well as an updated version of some of the information of exactly what headset we used, what light stands we used to hold the sensors, that kind of stuff is all going to be there. So check that out there. Chris said for older architects, this is what we see when we look at 2D plans. That's a great point. So I don't remember where it is, and I've been trying to find it forever, but I remember somewhere someone saying that it's something like 3% of the world can look at a floor plan or a 2D drawing and see it in 3 dimensions. And so that is where things like the VR mockups and these models and these visualizations come into play. Because yes, you may be able to see that, and I may see that when I look at a floor plan, but a majority of people who look at your floor plan don't see that. And that's the key with these mockups, is that you can put a floor plan in front of someone and they say, yeah, it looks great, but the reality is they may not have any idea what they're approving, right? So that to me is the key with this process, and that's why I think even on the design side, if you're not doing it, you should really start looking into this, because the value that we gain out of these mockups, you would a perfect example. So to tell a little story, on one of those healthcare ones, I haven't drank enough yet. Hold on. So we were doing a nurse's station, for example. Actually, you know what? I should give an OR. Should I give the OR example? No. Let's do the nurse's station. So we were doing a virtual mock-up of an entire nurse's station. And actually, you know what? I should run back to an example without blowing up. All right, so I'll have this looping. So we were doing a mock-up of, it's actually on this project, but it was a nurse's station that repeated itself about 8 times in a project. And we really wanted to get it right. It was being prefabricated off-site, and we were working in an occupied hospital, and we were sort of phasing it around. So it was really important to stay on schedule. It was really important to do off-site construction, whatever. So we did this mock-up working with the architect. We developed the space that kind of similar to what you're seeing here, except imagine it was a nurse's station. I just don't have that example up. And what we also did is we worked with the hospital and the technology equipment consultants, and we placed the equipment on the table. So we placed monitors, we placed mice, we placed keyboards, printers, label printers. You go through the list. If you've ever been in a hospital, you've seen that there's a lot of crap on the tables usually. There's all this equipment. And so we put it all on the table, and we actually went through almost 8 schemes with that nurse's station. And the first thing that we saw was a printer that was sitting on top of the desk was blocking the view of 3 rooms. And so that's something that no one would have found out until we finished the job and we put the printer on the table, right? And so think about that. Now you've got a design where the printer is blocking a room of 3 views. The other one, which is really unique, is we had end users like you're seeing here, nurses actually in here, giving us feedback. And they apparently carry around a binder. Every nurse has a binder. And we basically had them standing at the nurse's station, and there wasn't room for them to put their binder based on the way the 3 computers were next to each other. And that's another thing where that wasn't even in the model. That was just a nurse going through and saying, hey, where the heck am I going to put my binder? So those are the type of things that you would not pick up unless you did this process. Sure, if you built a full-size desk and had them come in, yes. But the material, the labor, the time and material or cost, and then to modify it 8 times to variations till they liked it, using that process would have been a nightmare. So before I jump onto inspections, I saw a bunch of little comments come in here, so I wanted to check it out. How are you bringing these models into Revit? They're all Revit models. I'm not bringing anything in. What you saw there was Enscape has RPC content, so that's the people that you were seeing. Any of the beds, the equipment, the printers, the whatever, all that stuff was either created by my team in-house, or we found it online and modified it, or we found the actual one online. So those were all Revit content. The entire scene is Revit content. Have you tried bringing in ArcVision RPC? No, I haven't really needed to. I have I toyed with it in the past, but at the moment Enscape had enough assets for what we needed. These examples are helpful and inspiring. Good. I'm glad they're helpful and inspiring, guys. Sweet. It's usually really nice. And right. That's exactly what I mean, Chris. We forget. It's really easy as an architect to forget that people don't see the world the way we do. And that's a general statement more than just talking about floor plans. All right. So the other way that we're using virtual reality is for something called virtual mockups. And this is virtual inspections. And this is really, really cool. And again, this goes back to my architecture side of things and having to deal with the inspection process at the end of a job and punch lists. And so what we said is, if we can do this with end users, why can't we do this with the fire marshal, the building inspector, the health inspector, the food service inspector, whatever, whoever is on the job? Why can't we do the same thing and have them put the goggles on, look at the space, and tell them, hey, why don't you walk through this room as if you're doing an inspection? We're not asking them to sign off on anything because it's not done yet, right? And so what we did is on multiple jobs now, before we even start, or finish steel on some of these jobs, we have the fire marshal, the building inspector, we have them walking through these spaces, and they are calling out things that you wouldn't imagine. Actually, you probably would if you've been through this process, that they would be changing at the end of the job. And so things like where horn strobes are, where exit signs are located, the color of the exit sign, fire extinguishers, fire pull stations, like the ability to have them in the project and involved, 7, 8 months, 9 months, a year before we finish it, when they usually just come in and give you a final punch list and then you have to change everything last minute and rip down walls and everything, is massive. And so here's some examples of this. Is actually we did it on a school. This is Lisa Yates. She's actually one of the architects who's checking it out. But on the background, you could see sort of spinning around is the Lumion model. We started in the cafeteria and the servery, and we had the health and safety inspector, the building inspector, the fire marshal. We had them walking through these exact rooms that you're seeing here, and they were looking for things like exit signs and whatever. We didn't actually tell them what to look for. We said, just walk through the space as if you're doing a final inspection. So here's actually the fire marshal, awesome dude. We've done it many times with him. And he's looking through the cafeteria and he's looking for things. And so some of the things that actually came up that we changed in the design with the architect, again, this is where you can see we're in the job site trailer. So right now this job we're putting up steel. And so the architect was in the room, the design team was in the room. And so things like the fire pull station, one of them we actually relocated around a 90-degree turn because he didn't like the location of it. So imagine this is a CMU building, this is a block building. Imagine changing that when he would normally be involved, which is at the end of the job, right? That's when you have all those lovely left out plates and these weird chipping of CMUs and stuff. Another thing is the color of the exit signs. It was spec'd, submitted, and approved as like I forgot if it was red or green, one or the other, as a specific color. And immediately he put the headset on and he said, "Why are those exit signs red?" And apparently the town has a requirement for them to be green. This was specified, approved. It went through all the channels. But imagine that. Imagine we were done with the project and he came in and said, "Hey, why are they all green?" We have to replace all of the exit signs, right? So those are stupid little things that we've caught in this VR inspection process. And so that was an example of a high school. We actually did a ton of rooms in a high school. We've done it for multiple phases. Here's another example in a dormitory. The same thing. Things that came up in the dormitory were supply, duct supplies, and their location to sprinkler heads, audible or visual doorbells, stuff like that. So it's amazing the kind of stuff that comes up during this process that you would never ever think of. So that's kind of the idea behind a visual inspection. So that's pretty cool. I hope that was useful. I see a bunch of questions, so I'm just going to read through a little bit. Mockup requires a lot of time. Do you package VR in the design contract or as an add-in? That's a good question. So remember, in this sense of things, we are the contractor. We're the CM, and so yes, they do take a decent amount of time, but it depends. If we have a decent Revit model from the design team and we've had that coordination, collaboration ahead of time, ideally we're just putting in the finishing touches of some of the details the design team doesn't put in there. Otherwise, we may be putting in more information, right? And so it all depends. For us, it's part of our services. It's part of our general conditions. The client understands and knows that this is a service that we provide ahead of time. And so it's on the design side, obviously you'd want to think about how you modify it. If you're modeling to a certain level of detail, for example, there's not much more to this that you can gain value from, or there's not much more to add to this where you can gain the same amount of value. So you have to figure out where the time versus value is there. ACAD asked if I save an alternate file with the Enscape objects. So by the nature of the process we're currently using for this, remember I'm the CM in this process, we usually are saving as a separate file. Sometimes we can link it in, but the reality is we're saving as a separate file, and depending on what we're doing with that file, we don't really need to hide the Enscape assets. But if you're on the architecture side of things, then I would definitely suggest you either have a linked file and you deal with the idea of linking materials through, which is a whole nother topic, or you can utilize design options is my suggestion. Put them in a design option. I don't personally like work sets and visibility. We don't need to go down that road right now, but definitely you want to play with the idea with the Enscape assets because they're obviously really ugly looking in two-dimensional plans. Any luck doing that with NYC DOB Inspectors? Very good question. So the furthest I've personally gone into New York is Westchester County, and so we are currently doing this process in Westchester County in White Plains, New York. In the DOB within the city, I do know we're doing variations of this. I'd have to reach out to my counterparts there to see what level of cooperation they've had with the DOB. But that's a very good question, and obviously, depending on your location and your health and building inspectors, there's the possibility it could be a better process or a worse process. The thing that we have realized though is that even the ones that we had to kind of pull into the process, they've found so much value out of it that they ask for it on the next jobs, and they become more involved or more open to it, I should say. And so I know bigger cities, it can be a little harder. The inspection process is tough in big cities, but I think where there's a will, there's a way, I promise. I promise you that the value is there to try. Do you know which other states do VR inspections? I mean, I don't know. I'm sure plenty of them do, or I'm hopefully right now a bunch of them will. But again, this is a pre-inspection, so we are not during the virtual piece of this. We are not asking them to sign a document that says they inspected. Okay, it's a pre-inspection to give us ideas, and ideally now when they come back at the end of the job, the inspection process is extremely smooth. And that's what we found on even the school projects that I was talking about, is the final inspection was extremely smooth and simple and easy, and they were much happier walking through the space. I will give you a little hint now with COVID-19 and the coronavirus and the quarantines and everything that's going on, we have had projects where we've had inspectors, and I won't say with cities and locations, but actually utilizing, we had cameras out there with our crew, and they were doing it via camera from their offices, looking at spaces and moving our crew was moving the camera around, and they actually did a virtual inspection. But that's a sign of the times and whatnot. Are those labels for the devices in the Revit file invisible in other applications? Yes. So those are model. Let's see if I play this video again. So we found that in some instances it made a lot of sense to have this model text on to let people know what the devices were. In some of the healthcare, for example, it was nice to have outlets and then say like this is the striker control box, this is the lighting control box, this is this, whatever. And so those exist, those are within our families, and they're model text with the ability to turn them on and off depending on how you want to control them. So yes, I guess is the short answer to that. James asked the same question. Brad and James. What's up, James? How you doing, man? Yeah, so those are all built in. And so part of what we do usually on this process is we're flipping out families in general, whether we're whatever process it ends up being, because we have families that just look better three-dimensionally. And so like a duplex, for example, most MEP engineers aren't using a duplex that looks really good in Enscape. And so these are all built within our families, and we have visibility parameters and different ways to control them globally within the process. The key to understand here is that we're the construction manager, so ideally all of this stuff is sort of built into the model, but for the most part, the models you're seeing here, they came from the models that were used to create the construction documents, but we are not creating construction documents, right? The information is either getting fed back and forth with the design team, and they're modifying, and we're updating it back and forth. So that's where I was talking about interoperability and that communication. In an ideal world, we would be assisting with adding the information, the additional information that maybe the design team doesn't add or won't put in their typical piece. Sweet. James, man, thanks for coming, dude. I'm sure James loves it when people talk about LOD, right, buddy? Every time I see your streams, it is just blows my mind. Cool. Do you use Enscape proxy objects? So what you're seeing here was actually, for the most part, before the whole linking asset thing came into play with Enscape, where you can link an Enscape asset with a Revit one. And so we haven't really, but I do plan on using it in the future, because there would be some cool functionality for it for us. So no, but yes, I guess. Brad said, give me a good looking duplex that also works with the electrical data and how to use it. Well, I mean, the part that you see, it is just the part that you see, right? I mean, it has nothing to do with the connections behind it, I guess, but I see your point. All right, cool. I see a couple. I'm into the graphic loop again. I guess you guys aren't enjoying. You're not enjoying when things loop too many times. I apologize. Let me jump back to my camera here. All right. So wow, that was a lot of content there. I actually wasn't sure how long it was going to take me to go through some of that, but you guys had some awesome questions. I'm just reading real quick to see if there's any questions before I wrap it up for tonight. Do you do visual clash detection using Enscape? It's a good point. Technically, anytime we're doing a mock-up or anytime we're doing any of these things, we're kind of doing visual clash, whether we're calling it that or not. A perfect example that recently came up is an operating room we're doing a virtual mock-up for, and the integration box for Striker, so that's for the booms and everything, was not part of our 3D coordination piece, and it wasn't really part of the architects, so it just kind of was, it was information that was kind of floating in between, that ether between the design team, the construction team, and then the consultants that do all that stuff, right? And so we put it in because it was part of the package that we had. It was part of shop drawings that they submitted, and that thing moved about 4 times until we got to it, and that was all just visual coordination. That was Stryker and the owner and ourselves and design team all on the phone, and it was just looking around the room to be like, where the hell are we going to put this thing, right? So that's sort of the example there. And then generally speaking, anytime you're looking in a model to that extent, you're doing visual clash detection, right? Let's see here. Wow, a lot of really good questions, guys. This is pretty awesome. I'm running out of steam. Let me put my throat here. How would you suggest a construction management student get into the BIM VDC side of construction management? Hey, I can tell you right now, if you don't have a job, you have to, get a job within construction management. But most CMs still are at the point where let's just say it's not a saturated market yet. So if you're interested in it, make sure you raise your hand and say you are. And most companies will have a place for it, right? It's just one of those things where I think it's still in its infancy. You know, if you're a company, I don't even know off the top of my head anymore, but it's a small percentage of even the global Turner staff, for example, but it's growing, right? And so I think just raising your hand and saying you're interested in it is a start, right? Depending on what company you work for and how they do development, you know. Let's see here. Is the Enscape VR mockup including an isolated floor? It depends. You know, a lot of those mockups ended up being whole floors. We're usually not. I mean, if you don't have to launch the whole building, we don't launch the whole building in Enscape. It is usually the whole building model, but we might do a section box when we're launching it. But we have done projects where we just launch the whole model and we jump into wherever we need. Kayla asked that she's a small company that doesn't have the manpower or budget to create awesome models like this. What features of Revit or BIM do you recommend as a super pared down version? To be honest with you, it's a matter, to me, it's a matter of efficiency more than it is a matter of paring down. And so, and also working with the design team, and if you're working with a design team that's developing quality models and you guys have an understanding ahead of time of how everyone's going to use them, then they can help. Usually it doesn't take a big change on the design team to modify or even just add a little step to their process, or maybe even just change, you know, put a piece of data in that'll make your life easier. And so that's what I focus on usually when I have those discussions. Is I'm not here to change your Revit templates and your wall naming conventions and all that stuff, because I've been there. I know what it's like setting those damn things up, right? But it may be something as simple as, hey, can you just make sure that your exterior walls, the functions are set to exterior wall, or your assembly code is right for the exterior wall? You know, something simple like that where I'm not changing any of that, but that will help us tremendously downstream, right? That's the key. Let's see. You join which part of the industry you're working personally. Oh, somebody just joined and asked which part of the industry do I work in. So I am a licensed architect. I worked for 10 years as an architect. I'm still a licensed architect, so I guess I could still say that. And now I work for a construction management company named Turner Construction. So hopefully that gives me a little credo for whatever question you're going to ask next. Last but not least, let's see. What is your suggestion for creating phases in Revit for a small residential design build company to be used during construction? How should we use parts? Well, I mean, are you saying, if you're saying phasing for the sake of the contractor using the phases, I would say don't even bother. If you're saying phasing for like existing and new and demo for that, that's one thing. But phasing a model for construction while you're making construction documents, unless it makes a ton of sense to how you're creating your documents and stuff, is extremely a pain in the ass. And it causes a lot of issues. And a lot of times it may not necessarily benefit the contractor. And so your design build, so it may be a little different. So I don't want to say that it's not valuable to you, but the phasing of jobs changes so rapidly and dramatically when you're planning out the construction process that it's very difficult to keep up with that. And then, as everyone who knows Revit out there, which I'm assuming a lot of you do, if you were to saying, if you phased your model and got a set of construction documents done and you had 4 phases and everything was selected and modified, imagine saying, well, we actually want to add a new phase in between 4 and 5. It'd be, right? It's just, whew. You get the idea. All right, one more question and then I'm going to wrap it up because it's been, oh my goodness, an hour and 10 minutes. Cool. How do you communicate with MEP companies in the construction stage? So I think you were talking about engineers. I think. If not, make sure you let me know if that's what you're talking about. But I'm not really sure what that question is actually asking. So I communicate using words. If you want to ask me later, go for it. All right. I think I'm going to wrap it up with that. Man, this was pretty cool. I had a great time. I hope you guys did too. This is a good topic. It was different. It was unique. Make sure, again, if you have not done so already, let me hit the button again. Ready? Make sure you subscribe to my channel here.